What happens when a music legend sits down for what should be a celebratory interview, only to face disrespect from someone she helped inspire? In just 36 seconds, Jennifer Hudson went from gracious host to tone-deaf interrogator, turning what should have been a moment of reverence into a masterclass in how not to interview your heroes. This is the story of how Chaka Khan, the Queen of Funk herself, had enough of being talked down to and walked off Jennifer Hudson's show, leaving the Oscar winner scrambling to save face on live television. Picture this. Chaka Khan, the woman who gave us I'm Every Woman, the voice that Jennifer Hudson herself has cited as a major influence, sitting across from her supposed admirer on national television. What should have been a love letter to a legend quickly devolved into something much darker. Hudson, riding high on her own success, seemed to forget she was sitting across from royalty. And when you disrespect the queen, you get exactly what you deserve. The setup seemed innocent enough. Jennifer Hudson's talk show had been gaining momentum, and booking Chaka Khan was supposed to be a coup. Here was a chance for Hudson to sit with one of her idols, to pay homage to the woman whose music had shaped her own career. The audience was primed for a feel-good moment, expecting warmth, mutual admiration, and maybe even a duet. Nobody expected what actually happened. Chaka Khan walked onto that set with the grace and poise of someone who had been doing this for decades. At 70 years old, she moved with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth, who had earned her place in music history through sheer talent and perseverance. She settled into her chair, flashed that famous smile, and prepared for what she thought would be a respectful conversation between two artists. Hudson, on the other hand, seemed nervous. Maybe it was the pressure of interviewing such a legend, or maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever the case, from the moment she opened her mouth, something felt off. Her energy was scattered, her questions felt rehearsed, and there was an underlying tension that even the studio audience could feel. "So Chaka," Hudson began, her voice carrying an odd formality that immediately set the tone, "you've been in this business for a very long time." Right there, in that opening line, you could hear it. Not the reverence you'd expect when addressing a legend, but something that sounded almost dismissive. Chaka Khan, ever the professional, smiled and nodded, probably thinking Hudson was just nervous and would find her rhythm. "Yes, I have been blessed to have a long career," Chaka responded with warmth, clearly trying to set a positive tone for the conversation. But Hudson pressed on, and her next question revealed where her head was really at. "And you've seen so many changes in the music industry. I mean, things are so different now from when you started back in the 70s. The phrasing was telling. Back in the 70s carried an implication that Chaka Khan's era was ancient history, that her relevance was tied to a bygone era, rather than acknowledging her as a timeless artist who had influenced generations, including Hudson herself. Chaka Khan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Those who knew her could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her smile became just a fraction less genuine. She was reading the room, and what she was reading, she didn't like. "Music is always evolving," she replied diplomatically, "but good music, real music, that never goes out of style." It was a gentle correction, a reminder that artistry transcends trends and decades. But Hudson, whether through nerves or arrogance, missed the hint entirely. Right, Hudson nodded, but her next words showed she wasn't really listening. "But don't you think that artists today, we have to work so much harder than artists did back then? I mean, with social media and streaming and everything?" The audacity was breathtaking. Here was Jennifer Hudson, sitting across from a woman who had to break through barriers that Hudson couldn't even imagine, suggesting that somehow today's artists had it tougher than the pioneers who paved the way. Chaka Khan's posture straightened. The diplomatic smile was gone, replaced by something much more direct. She had been in this business long enough to recognize disrespect when she heard it, and she wasn't about to let it slide. "Harder?" Chaka's voice carried a new edge. "Baby, you have no idea what hard was. We didn't have the internet to promote ourselves. We didn't have streaming platforms paying us royalties. We had to fight for every single opportunity, every recording contract, every chance to be heard." The temperature in the studio shifted. What had started as an awkward interview was now becoming something else entirely. Hudson, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing across from her, doubled down instead of backing off. "Well, sure, but I mean, nowadays we have to be everything. Singer, actress, businesswoman, social media influencer. Back then you could just focus on the music. Just focus on the music." As if that was somehow easier, as if Chaka Khan hadn't spent decades fighting for creative control, battling record labels, dealing with industry executives who saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be packaged and sold. Chaka Khan leaned forward, her voice dropping to that tone anyone familiar with her music would recognize. It was the same intensity she brought to every performance, but now it was directed at Hudson. Just focus on the music? Do you hear yourself right now? We had to write, arrange, produce, and perform while fighting for basic respect in a male-dominated industry. We had to tour relentlessly because that was the only way to make real money. We had to build our fan base one person at a time, one show at a time, without any of the tools you take for granted today. Hudson's face flushed. She was clearly flustered, but instead of apologizing or changing course, she made the fatal mistake of trying to defend her position. "I'm not trying to diminish what you accomplished," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just saying that the landscape is more complex now. Artists today have to navigate so many more platforms and expectations." More complex? Chaka's voice rose slightly, and everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Let me tell you about Complex. Complex was being a black woman in the music industry in the 1970s. Complex was fighting for songwriting credits that were rightfully mine. Complex was dealing with radio stations that wouldn't play your music because of the color of your skin. The audience was dead silent. This wasn't the feel-good interview they had come to see. This was a masterclass in how quickly things could go wrong when respect wasn't given where it was due. Hudson's team behind the cameras were probably signaling for her to change direction, to apologize, to acknowledge that she had stepped in it. But Hudson's pride seemed to kick in. Maybe she felt like backing down would make her look weak on her own show. Maybe she genuinely believed she was right. Either way, what she said next sealed her fate. "Look, I respect everything you've done, but you have to understand that times have changed. The music industry today requires a different skill set. Artists like me, we have to be multifaceted in ways that weren't necessary before. Artists like me." Those 4 words hung in the air like a slap. Hudson had just suggested that she and her contemporaries were somehow more skilled, more versatile than the legends who came before them. She had just told Chaka Khan to her face that modern artists were superior to the pioneers who had paved the way. Chaka Khan went very still. It was the kind of stillness that comes before an explosion, the calm that precedes the storm. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of 5 decades in the music business. "Artists like you?" she repeated slowly. "Let me tell you something about artists like me. We created the template that artists like you follow. We opened the doors that you walk through. We fought the battles that made your career possible." Hudson realized too late that she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Her face showed panic as she tried to backtrack. "That's not what I meant. I was just trying to say that." "I know exactly what you meant," Chaka cut her off. "You meant that somehow what we did wasn't as demanding as what you do. You meant that our struggles weren't as real as yours. You meant that experience and wisdom don't matter as much as having an Instagram account." The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. Hudson's producers were probably having heart attacks behind the scenes, knowing that this interview was spiraling completely out of control. "Chaka, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Hudson tried desperately. "No misunderstanding at all," Chaka replied, standing up from her chair. "I understand perfectly. I understand that you invited me on your show not to honor my legacy, but to use me as a stepping stone to elevate yourself. I understand that you see my 5 decades of experience as something quaint and outdated, rather than something to be respected." Hudson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had been completely unprepared for this level of directness, this raw honesty from a woman who had nothing left to prove to anyone. The Oscar winner, the Grammy winner, the woman who had conquered Broadway and Hollywood, was being schooled by true royalty, and everyone in that room could see it. "That's not true," Hudson stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have nothing but respect for you. You're one of my biggest influences." Chaka Khan turned to face her fully, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her stripes the hard way. "If I'm one of your biggest influences, then why are you treating me like I'm some relic from a museum? If you respect me so much, why did you invite me here just to tell me how much harder your generation has it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Hudson had no good answer because there wasn't one. She had fundamentally misunderstood what this interview should have been about. Instead of celebrating a legend, she had tried to use that legend to validate her own struggles. "I never said you were a relic," Hudson protested weakly. "You didn't have to say it," Chaka replied. "Every question you've asked tonight has been designed to diminish what my generation accomplished." You've spent this entire interview trying to prove that artists today are somehow more talented, more hardworking, more deserving than the people who built this industry. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of Hudson's humiliation. Her producers had to be torn between cutting to commercial and letting this historic moment play out. After all, this was the kind of television people would be talking about for years. Chaka Khan began removing her microphone, her movements deliberate and final. I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a conversation with someone who understood the shoulders she was standing on. Instead, I find myself being lectured about how easy I had it by someone who has benefited from everything I helped build. Please don't leave, Hudson pleaded. And for the first time all night, her voice sounded genuine. Maybe the reality of what was happening was finally sinking in. Maybe she was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. But it was too late. Chaka Khan had reached her limit. And once a legend reaches that point, there's no going back. You want to know what hard work looks like? Chaka said, placing her microphone on the arm of her chair. Hard work is performing in clubs where they didn't think women belonged. Hard work is writing songs that record labels didn't want to promote because they came from a black woman. Hard work is building a career without the benefit of reality show exposure or industry connections handed to you on a silver platter. Each word was delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut through Hudson's arrogance and expose the truth underneath. Hudson's face was flushed with embarrassment, her composure completely shattered. I worked for everything I have, Hudson said defensively, but her voice sounded small in comparison to Chaka's commanding presence. Nobody said you didn't, Chaka replied, but you seem to think that your work is somehow more valuable, more difficult, more impressive than mine. You seem to think that having followers on social media is harder than fighting for basic respect in a segregated industry. The studio audience was completely silent, transfixed by this real-time demolition of a host by her guest. This wasn't scripted drama or manufactured conflict. This was authentic emotion from a woman who had given her life to music and wasn't about to let anyone diminish that sacrifice. I never meant to disrespect you, Hudson said, and there might have been genuine remorse in her voice. But it was far too little and way too late. Chaka Khan paused at the edge of the interview area, looking back at Hudson one final time. When she spoke, it was with the wisdom of someone who had seen it all, done it all, and earned the right to speak her truth without apology. The problem with your generation is that you think struggle started with you. You think the challenges you face are unprecedented, that the obstacles you overcome are unique. But every generation of artists has faced difficulties. The difference is, we didn't spend our time explaining why we had it harder than everyone else. We just did the work. With that, Chaka Khan walked off the set, leaving Jennifer Hudson sitting alone under the studio lights, her interview in ruins, her reputation damaged, and her understanding of respect forever changed. Hudson sat in stunned silence for several seconds, the weight of what had just happened clearly sinking in. The woman she had claimed to admire had just given her a lesson she would never forget. The legend she had supposedly respected had shown her what real dignity looked like. When Hudson finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We're going to take a quick break," she said to the cameras. But everyone knew the interview was over. There would be no coming back from this. No amount of editing could fix what had just happened. As Chaka Khan disappeared behind the curtain, she left behind more than just an empty chair. She left behind a reminder that respect isn't something you can fake, that legends aren't created by social media metrics, and that real artistry comes from a place that no amount of modern technology can replicate. Jennifer Hudson had learned the hardest lesson of her career. When you invite a queen to your table, you better make sure you know how to treat royalty. Because if you don't, she'll remind you exactly who you're dealing with. And she'll do it in front of everyone. The Queen of Funk had spoken, and her message was clear. Respect your elders, honor your influences, and never, ever assume that success gives you the right to diminish those who paved your way. It was a lesson Jennifer Hudson would carry with her for the rest of her career, and one that everyone watching would never forget.